is Hazel Clark and I'm a therapist and Pilates instructor at Mountain Massage Company here in Cumbria in the Lake District. And this morning I have got a reformer workout for you. It's probably not a beginner workout, it's probably more of an intermediate one, although I will be offering modifications for some of these exercises. So if you are finding it too challenging, then try one of the modifications, or if you want to make it harder, we'll try and offer up some of those as well. So I've got my reformer set up. I've got my bar kind of nice and high. For me it's not completely vertical, but you're going to want it nice and high. And it can kind of stay in that position for the most part of this workout today, I think. We're going to try this workout today with one spring. So it will make some exercises more challenging. On the abdominals, it will make some exercises sort of slightly less stable, and it will also make some of them slightly easier as well. So we're going to try to stay on one spring. So I've got one medium spring on, one medium spring. So we're going to come into sort of a modified scooter, modified hip flexor stretch. So I've got one foot up against the shoulder pad. I'm just going to start with some nice easy stretching first of all. I've got my foot, my standing foot up against sort of in line with the springs here, and we're just going to go for a little bit of a quad hip flexor stretch first of all. So my knee is kind of staying over my ankle, and I'm just pushing the carriage back with my back leg. So my back hip is extending, I'm pushing my back foot out towards the wall behind me. We want those shoulder blades sliding and gliding down the back of the rib cage, nice long neck. So my eye gaze is kind of down, I guess a couple of metres ahead of me out there, just looking out into my garden. So we're just getting a little bit of stretch here. So what we can do from this position is we can kind of, once we've got our balance a little bit, so you can stay here if you want to, or once we've got our balance a little bit, we can kind of come upright. Maybe just a light touch, and we could add a little reach with that arm. So on the same side as your carriage leg, we're going to reach that arm up, so we're getting a little bit more of a three-dimensional stretch there. So as my leg goes back, my hand is reaching up, I'm also taking ever so slight little side bend, I guess, as well, just to really open up through that side of the body. Imagine the ribs kind of just separating slightly, space in between your shoulder and your pelvis. Just opening up and reaching up, just feeling that lovely fascial stretch. If you wanted to add a little bit of rotation in here, you can. So we could kind of rotate out and away a little bit, and that gives it slightly different sort of stretch. Feels really nice. And as we're doing this, if you try to think about the heaviness in your tailbone here, so we're not kind of aiming to get too much sort of arching into the back. We want to really try and get that nice stretch. Okay, let's just do one more here. Oh, lovely. And then we're just going to sort of slide onto the carriage. So you've only got one spring on, so do be mindful that the carriage can move around slightly, okay? Just going to come into the centre of the carriage just to warm up the abdominals. We're just going to go for a little bit of our knee stretches. So with our knee stretches, we're just sort of warming up the shoulders slightly as well here. So we kind of want, my shoulders are just ever so slightly back from my hands. That might be my foot bar position. You might find you've got sort of shoulders over your hands. But I want you to think about the length in your spine. So again, think about tucking that tailbone ever so slightly. So we're sort of aiming to keep that lower back in neutral as we send both knees away. We're just waking up the abdominals a little bit. We're waking up the shoulders a little bit as well. I'll be doing a bit of weight bearing here. So I've got all my fingers over the bar. So I'm not in a sort of a hook grip. I've got all of the fingers over the bar. So stack the wrists. Let's do a couple more. We're just going to come into a couple of little cat stretches here. So bring the carriage all the way back in. And we're slightly short in the cat position here, so we're sort of not quite knees under hips and hands under shoulders, but we'll do our best to sort of have a little bit of flexion and extension in the spine. So as we do our cat stretches, as we arch our back, I sort of like to talk about having that imaginary tail, tucking the tail between our legs, separating the shoulder blades, looking down towards our knees, pushing the kind of the ground away, the carriage away. And then as we sort of concave that, we sort of stick that imaginary tail in the air, we drop the belly and the chest, the shoulder blades glide towards each other a little bit, and we look forward. And we're just alternating between those two positions, just remembering that our spine can articulate and move. Maybe it feels a little bit rusty in some places this morning. We'll just try to ease that back up with a little bit of movement. Let's just do one more here. And then we're going to stay in this round back position. So stay in that sort of cat position, angry cat position, or scared cat position. And we're going to try to go for our knee stretches here. So we won't go as far because attempting to keep that round back is going to limit our movement just ever so slightly. We're just seeing if we can explore that movement as we warm up the body today. So again, we're just moving from the hips. So the shoulders, wherever there is your sort of position of stability here, the shoulders and the hands kind of don't move. And we're just thinking about sending the hips away, sending the knees away towards the back of the room. Trying to keep a little bit of that flexion, which I've lost a little bit there. There we go. And last one. Okay, let's go for that sort of modified kind of scooter stretch on the other side. So my standing leg, my floor leg is kind of up in line with my springs here. I'm just going to have both hands on the foot bar just to begin with. And my back foot is up against the headrest. And let's just start sending that carriage away slightly. Just getting a little bit of a stretch kind of down through this quad, down through this thigh. So think about again that length through the spine, sort of lovely long from your tailbone all the way up through your neck and out the top of the head. Think about being nice and sort of wide and smiley and open through the fronts of the collarbones, through the fronts of the clavicles. The chin is, I guess, gently tucked. We talk about that imaginary ball or imaginary kind of peach under the chin, and we don't want to drop that ball by going forward, and we don't want to sort of crush it by over-exaggerating that chin nod. And then let's start to add in that fascial stretch now. So on the same side as your carriage leg here, we're going to send the leg back and we're going to reach kind of up and over. I am, I guess, coming into a slight little side bend there, but it's not huge. Maybe because I'm really tight, so I'm feeling this stretch quite a lot actually. Yeah, I definitely don't need to take it much further than that. Still thinking of that kind of that intention of keeping that tailbone nice and long here. So what I mean by that is we don't sort of want to compromise our back by bowing it just in order to push the leg back a little bit further. And back in. Lovely. Okay, so we're going to come into our feet in straps. The other bit of equipment that you might need today, although you could use like a cushion or something if you've got one, and if you haven't, then I'll give you alternatives for all of this, it doesn't matter. But the other bit of equipment that I am going to use today is the soft ball, the goof ball. So this is an APPI goof ball. And I'm just going to pop that under the carriage because I won't use that just yet. So you have only got one spring on, so just be mindful of how you move on and off the reformer today. I'm going to come into feet in straps. So my foot bar is already kind of nice and high, so that I know that this is going to be good for me. And we're just going to come onto that. So I'm choosing not to have my head rest up because that feels better for my neck. But you may want to have your head rest up just a little bit. Alright, so to come into your straps, again, you're only on a light spring, so you don't need too much force here. Let's bring one of our feet into our long strap. Put a tiny bit of push through that, hold the carriage there, and we're going to bring the other leg up and pop ourselves into our strap here. Okay, so we're on a nice light spring. So this is going to emphasise our abdominals a little bit more today. So rather than our leg strength, because we're on a light one. And we're going for a lift and lower. So my shoulders are just gently resting up towards my shoulder pads, but they're not jammed up against them. Thinking about that nice neutral spine. I'm just having a little move around there, just to remind myself where that is this morning, so my back's nice and stiff. So, with this lift and lower on a light spring, we need to recruit a little bit more abdominal engagement. So as the legs lower down, we want to think of that belt gently tightening around the hips to avoid the tummy kind of like popping out and bulging into that kind of dome shape. So if you want to, you can have your hands on your tummy there, just making sure you're recruiting those. So I kind of like to imagine my hips like drawing together like magnets. We've got that little tuck up and in, pelvic floor, so that feeling of tightening around that passage and pulling it up as if you needed to stop yourself sort of having a wee. And just a few more here, just again warming the abdominals up really at this point. And if you're adding the breathing, we generally try to breathe out on the harder part of the movement and breathe in on the slightly easier part. So on this one, this would be breathing out as we send the legs away and breathing in to bring them back in. Okay, so let's add a little bit of our abdo prep. So you can have the hands under the back of the head, or you can have the hands sort of down by your side. So, as we reach the feet away, I'm going to curl up to have a little look at them. And we want to think about this curl up kind of happening from the sternum. So imagine that your sternum and your ribs are kind of sort of coming down to meet your pelvis. I want to think about that neck being nice and long and that chin just gently holding, nestling that little ball. Okay, I'm going to do one more. And we're going to come into our bend and stretch. So, with this one, let's see if we can keep our feet in parallel now. If you want to at this point, if you have got a little ball or something, you could put that between the ankles. So we're just sending the feet and the knees out and away to about that 45-degree angles if we wanted to press halfway up the wall in front of us. We've got that lower back in neutral. So we're not sort of trying to imprint ourselves into the carriage. Just staying in that parallel. And again, we could make this a bit of a modified kind of coordination exercise. So we could kind of press out and come into that curl up, then bring the legs back in and place the head down. So the reason that I'm doing the arms as well is normally we do this with the hands in straps for our sort of part of our mid-back series. So we kind of send the legs and the arms away, we bring the knees back in and we curl down. And normally you would then bring the carriage back in with the hands in the straps. But that's meaningless to you today, so just write that to one side. We're just going to add a little bit more abdominal recruitment. Again, you can have the hands at the back of the head for a little bit support there. And if this is too much on the abdominals, we can just go for a little bit more of our bend and stretch. It will work your adductor muscles a little bit harder if you've got something between the ankles. So if you start feeling the groin becoming uncomfortable, you can take your little cushion away. But do try it. And if you are feeling that sort of uncomfortable sensation around the pubic bone, try to think of the muscles around your bottom, so around that passage. Think of them tightening in. Again, some people like to imagine their sitting bones and magnets like drawing together, and see if that helps a little bit, because it should recruit a little bit more gluteal stuff, a bit back part of pelvic floor. So just go for one more. And come back in. Okay, I think we need a little bit of a stretch there. So we're going to come into our 45 degrees, bring your feet up towards the ceiling. I'm quite tight in the old hamstrings, so that's about as far as I can get. We want to think of that tailbone staying nice and heavy on the carriage, so that sacrum, the sort of the flat bone at the back at the bottom of the spine, staying kind of glued and heavy to the carriage. And we're just going for our adductor stretch. So this will get a lovely stretch in the inside of your thighs, maybe even down towards the inside of the knees a little bit as well. So the carriage stays nice and still. That's your mission for this one, is we don't actually move the carriage. And if you are quite flexible and you found your feet some sort of up here somewhere, your carriage has moved, just gently bring the heels together, pull in around the bottom, and just drive the heels down just slightly, so you're pushing and keeping some tension in the straps. But again, this is a nice light spring, so we don't have to work too hard to keep the carriage here, but it does work our hip stabilizers and our abdominals a little bit more. Okay. Lovely. Oh, that's a nice stretch. I'm just going to do one more. I might just hang out here and just applying a little bit of overpressure onto the ropes here, because that just feels like heaven. So stretching shouldn't hurt. It should feel quite nice. So just back off a bit if it doesn't. It probably means you're just pushing a little bit too much. Okay, we're going to go for some lift and lower again, but this time we're going to do a single leg. So this will make it a little bit more leg based, but we're still really working our abdominals here. Now, one leg's going to stay up towards the ceiling and one leg is going to press down. If this is too much for you, you can of course do double legs. But it's exactly the same as we were doing on our lift and lower, but this time we're just going to go one leg, and we could do that because we were on a lighter spring. So as I say, I've chosen one medium spring today. Now with this, watch the control, keep some tension in that rope of the working leg. Keep your tailbone or sacrum nice and heavy so it doesn't sort of get peeled off of the carriage when you come back up. And let's think about being long through the waist. So if you want, you can pop your fingertips kind of down on your on your hip, the pointy sticking out a bit of your pelvis at the front there, your ilium. And you could have your thumbs up on your rib cage, and what we're watching for is that space stays nice and equal, so we're not sort of scrunching the waist on either side, so we're not getting sort of shorter on one side as we push the leg down, if that makes sense. So you want to stay nice and long through both sides of the waist so we don't sort of get twisted to one side. I'm just going to do maybe one more on each side. We're going to come back up there. Okay, so we're going to do a few leg circles, or hip circles actually, but we're not going to do the classic kind of sort of leg circles that we learn. We're going to do some double legs because we're on a nice light spring. Let's try to control both hips, so we're zipping the legs together and we're getting a bit of rotation. muscle around like the pelvis basically. So you will rock a little bit on this. It's impossible to keep yourself perfectly neutral, but again, let's think about keeping it from the pelvis so we're not just kind of being pulled in loads of different directions. And then I'm going to change direction and go the other way. Just playing with movement a little bit. So I'm also getting like quite a nice sort of hamstring stretch in the outside of the back of my legs, so which is quite nice. I'm just going to do one more. With the flick. Okay, so we're going to come out of these straps now. So let's take one leg out, find the foot bar, pop that strap back in your peg, and then take the other foot out, find the foot bar, pop the strap back on the peg and bring yourself in. Now, this is where we are going to use our cushion or our little ball here. Now, we're going to do a little bit of our foot series, and then there is the option to do a little bit of our jumping as well. Just be mindful when you're coming off and out of the carriage again, you've just got the one spring on, so it's easy for the carriage to move. So we're going to have the ball kind of under our mid-back. So this is, you've got options here. If this is too much for you, if you've not got the neck control, then you don't have to add this. You can just lay straight back down. But I'm going to work my upper abdominals a little bit more and destabilise myself by coming and having a little lie on this goof ball. So, I'll give you options when it comes to the jumping bit as well actually. So come and have a pop down and we'll do the first bit first. So we want this ball kind of under our mid-back. So if you think, say for women, probably thinking about bra strappy kind of level, depending on where that is for you. Guys, probably heart rate monitoring. So we're probably talking like the bottom of your shoulder blades, that kind of area. It should feel quite nice. It shouldn't feel like it's kind of pressing into your neck or into your lower back. Okay, so I've got my hands at the base of the skull. And I'm just looking down, probably just over my feet and out into my garden here. Abdominals are pulled in, so you want to think about sort of just gently scooping that belly in. And we've got that connection of the rib cage down to the front of the pelvis here. And we're going for our foot series at night. Now I've actually just changed to heels, so I was on toes just a second ago. But I've just come onto my heels because I'm finding that a little bit easier for my range of movement. And again, it's a light spring. So we don't have to work too hard here, so this is more about abdominal control. I'm just going to do a couple more. And then we're going to add a little bit of single leg. So this is a single leg series. We're going to come up into that tabletop. And let's just press away. And very quickly, we're going to take this into our bicycles. So as we come back in, we're going to reach that leg over the foot bar. And as we push away, we'll draw it back into tabletop. So if this is too much in your neck, if you're finding that you're really burning through here and all of these sort of muscles are becoming very taut in the front of your neck, first of all, try tucking the chin and sort of scooping and lengthening through the back of the neck. Try just recruiting that abdominal, those abdominals a little bit stronger. And if that really is too much for you, then take the ball away and lie yourself flat down onto your carriage. Okay. Alright, elbows are nice and wide. And let's just take this into a little bit of under and over. So we just need to coordinate a little bit more. Again, we need to really think about keeping that pelvis in neutral because it's easy to rock in and out at this point. You don't have to add in the under and over, but it's just a slight little bit more to think about, a little layer of coordination that just makes it a little bit more challenging. Just going to do one more, and then I'm going to swap legs. So, let's come on to our tabletop, just to see how that feels for a second. Just adjusting myself from the ball slightly. And then we're going to go for that bicycle. So, reaching that leg long over the foot bar. and drawing it back into tabletop. I'm starting to feel these abdominals now, so I'm having to work a little bit harder to hold my position. And I'm going to do 2 more. And then I'm going to do 3 under and overs. So I'm going to go over and under. And if you're adding in the breathing, I don't know how many that is, let's do 2 more, more than 3. So again, just nod and tap the chin a couple of times, recruit into those abdominals a little bit stronger, perhaps probably more than 2 more. And then we're going to come back down onto our foot ball and come back down. If you want a little moment off the ball, you can just retrieve that, come onto an elbow, you can retrieve the ball just for a second and just lay yourself back down. So obviously this is your option to do those exercises in this position with the head down. Okay, so that's your option there. Now, I'm going to go for a little bit of gentle jumping, and I'm going to demo this with the foot bar and the jump board. So, the reason it's good to have the ball here is because we can look at what we're doing. So with the jumping, if you've not done jumping before, you don't have to do this next section. And if you've not done it before, I'd always recommend doing it with the jump board. So in fact, I will show you first. Right, so for that, I'm just going to need to take away my foot plate for a moment. And I'm going to will have to move my bar, and I'm going to put my jump board in. So if you've got a jump board, make sure it's safely and securely slotted in. So I'll show you with this first. So I'm still on the same spring. I haven't changed springs throughout this whole morning. I'm going to have my ball, or if you've got your cushion or something, pop it under your back here, because it's a little bit easier to sort of see, basically. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So this kind of acts as, this kind of acts as our sort of our foot bar, but obviously it's a bit more of a solid thing to land on. So you can start, we'll work up, shall we? Okay, so chin's tucked, hands under the back of the head. So exactly as we were doing before, we're just going to bend and stretch out. Now we're on a nice light spring. So if you're wanting to have a little jump, we're looking at just extending into a straight leg. So point the toes, straighten the legs. And then as you land, we're looking for that nice, soft, gentle landing on the balls of the feet. And think about having the feet kind of where you can see them. So they're landing. So for me, it's probably like 2/3 up the jump board. Nice, soft, gentle landing. And as we jump, we're having to recruit the abdominals quite strongly. And this light spring gives us quite a lot of air time, so we've got time to think in this position. The heavier the spring, the quicker you snap back down to the board. And it's stronger workout for the legs, but you don't get as much thinking time, so it could be harder to control the movement. So as you jump away, really think about trying to make those legs as straight as possible and pointing the toes. Okay, you can have a little rest there for a second. I'm just going to show you what that would be like with the foot bar. So the foot bar is definitely a little bit more, I guess, advanced because there's less of a surface area to land on. So it requires a tiny bit more kind of eye, brain, feet coordination. But it's a nice variation, especially if you don't have a jump board. So I'm putting that up onto my height position. So for you and your reformer, that might be completely in the vertical. But for me and my range of movement, I'm just ever so slightly off the vertical there. Okay, again, remember you're on the light springs and careful as you come on and off the carriage. I'm going to use my ball again, and this brings us into just a supported position where we can look down and see what our feet are doing. So I'm kind of up onto the balls of my toes here, just there a little bit more sort of sensitive. So again, you can start with that bend and stretch. And then we could just go for a little gentle bit of air, bit of clearance. Nice and straight with the legs, trying to point the toes. And it's just a nice variation. And we've got a good eye line on that bar, and we can see what the feet are doing. The head's supported, the elbows are out and wide. I've just got a very light sort of touch on the back of the head. I'm not kind of pulling my neck up. And if you want to, we could add some variations in here. So we could go for a little star jump. And you can do this whether you're on the jump board or on your football. And if you want to, we could go for a little bit of a arms and hands as well. We're just going to do a few more. Let's go for 4. Last 3. Last 2. Last 1. Oh. Okay, let's come back in. So, let's just gently come off our ball. And we're actually going to come into our sideline position. There will be some stretching at the end, I promise. Okay, I'm going to put my ball down here and use it as a bit of a pillow. And I'm going to have my arm out in front. So I'm just going to take a moment to sort of try to line my spine up a little bit. So the head's now on my ball. You can remove the ball at any time and pop your headrest up or pop your head pad in, that's fine. Okay, so try to have that spine nice and long, and we're going to do our side of feet pulling in straps, sideline. So let's think about popping our top foot into our strap here and just pushing around the foot guard, my bottom foot. And then let's just shuffle ourselves about a little bit. So you want your sort of send your top here down and away towards the wall in front of you, down below. Think about that little sort of mouse hug up under your waist, so we're gently lifting the waist away from the floor. Okay, we're on a medium spring, so this I'm going to find probably quite challenging actually. And we're just going to go for our press, our bend and stretch. And we're just going to press that foot away. So this whole session today is kind of ab and I guess like hip, glute dominant. It's not super heavy for anything, as I say, it's a little bit more, I guess some exercises you might find a little bit less stable. Okay. And we're going to take this into a bit of a lift and lower, a leg lift, side leg lift. So we're going to allow that leg to come up and back down. So actually, if you allow it to kind of come sort of out and up, so I guess slightly on the diagonal. But I want you to think about keeping that top waist nice and long. So we're sending that top hip down and away the whole time. I'm just going to go for a couple more. Last one. Okay, so let's think about finding that foot down if we can, that bottom leg. There we go, I'm just going to take that foot out. Alright, so pop your ball down to one side for a moment. We're going to come onto our hands and knees and we're going to face the back of our reformer. So let's think about coming over onto our front. Again, just moving nice and quietly and softly because we're only on that light spring. I'm just going to put my ball over on the other side because I'll need that in a moment. And let's think about coming into our cat. So bring your knees up towards your shoulder pads and let's just have a couple of little cat stretches here for a moment. We will do some glute stretching at the end, I promise. Just arch and bend that back a couple of times. And then we're going to think about coming back into that neutral spine. Now, from this position, I want you to walk your hands forward a little bit. So probably about 1 to 2 handstands forward, okay? So my hands are now in front of my shoulders, but I want you to think about the shoulder blades going back and down. So I'm not sort of here losing my neck, I'm sending those shoulders back and down. And we're going to work through the arms, so tummy's tucked, and we're going to pull with the arms to bring the carriage up to the hands, and then control it back and away. So just before it hits the stopper, I'm going to bring that carriage back out again. So you can make this harder by walking your hands a little bit further, but we're just working through the shoulders at this point. So your shoulder blades, I want you to think about locking them back and down towards your back pockets. Our back is staying nice and long here, so the chin is tucked, I'm looking down on the floor. And I want you to think about that length through your spine, so from the base of your neck through to the tip of your tailbone, being nice and long, sucking that belly in away from your carriage, away from your reformer. Let's just go for a couple more. And then we're going to change this exercise up. So this time, we're going to hold the carriage out here, and we're going to allow the hips to send the carriage away, and then pull it back in. So with this one, I've just literally snuck my knees slightly away from the shoulder pads there. Okay, so we're changing the emphasis of this exercise. The shoulders are still having to work for holding the carriage out, but we are sort of tucking the tummy as we drag the knees now in towards the hands for our cat hips, and then allow the carriage to move away from us, but controlling it. So I want you to think about your abdominals shortening as you drag the knees in towards your hands, and lengthening as you send that carriage away. Let's do a couple more, nice and slowly. Let's do 2 more. Shoulder blades back and down, chin is tucked. And then you can lengthen yourself down and away. Take a little bit of a shell pose. Just allow the hands to relax for a moment. You can allow your head to just rest down on your head pad. And we're going to come to our side sequence on the other side. So you can use your ball under your head, or you can have your head rest up. It's absolutely up to you. I find it a little bit more comfortable with having something thicker under my head, so I'm going to put the ball there. So I'm going to turn my back to you, if that's okay. So let's think about making ourselves nice and long on the carriage. And depending on the length of your reformer, you'll be sort of more comfortable or less comfortable depending on the sort of the length of your carriage here. So I'm just pushing that away, bending my top leg, bringing myself into that strap here, and then just putting a little bit of tension through that to hold myself in place. Okay, got that little mouse hole gap under my waist here, so I'm sort of not scrunching down and collapsing, sending the top hip down and away and creating that little mouse hole gap here. Okay, we're going to go for a press our sort of bend and stretch. So this is really working on sort of hip stability and control, gluteal control. So my carriage, my reformer is quite a short one really. It's a Byron Bay reformer. It is at the entry level level of the market, so it's one of the cheaper models. It works for me, but it's not so adjustable. So if you are particularly tall and you're thinking about getting a reformer, you will need one that's maybe got a little bit more adjustability. Okay, we're going to take this into our sort of side leg lift. So as the leg lifts up, we're going to allow it to kind of come forward just slightly so we get a little bit more range. It works the glutes slightly differently. But the important thing here is to keep that waist nice and long. So we don't sort of want to be kind of like wiggly from the waist here. We want to be nice and long and controlled, and moving and controlling it all from this kind of area here. We're just going to go for 4 more. Last 3. Last 2. Last 1. Okay, I'm going to bend this back in. I've just found my foot bar there with my other foot, and we're going to pop that back on the peg and bring myself back in. Okay, right. So we've got a little bit of stretching to do now. So I'm going to come in and turn facing towards my foot bar. Sorry, I just had a complete mental block of what we're doing there. I'm just going to move this little ball down to one side, so I'll pop that down there. And we're going to go for a bit of a modified knee stretch series. So I'm putting one foot onto my foot plate. So in the full one, we kind of, we aim to work on the foot bar. And I'm just going to bring this into a little bit of a modified hip flexor stretch first of all. So I've got my foot on my plate here, and the front of my foot is actually up against my foot bar here, and I'm in a really nice comfy position. I'm sort of holding on to my foot bar. Okay, I'm just pushing my back leg away. So really similar to where we started actually. We're just sending that back foot away and just getting a little bit of opening through the front here. Now, you can come a little bit more upright, and that will get you a little bit more as well. Now then, let's bring this into more of a hamstring stretch. So this time, we kind of keep the knee in. So we sort of forget about this leg now, and we're going to think about this front leg, and we're going to push away with that front leg and draw it back in. So this is a modified hamstring stretch. We're going to do this on the carriage. So I like this as a bit of a, it's a little bit, it's not so strong an exercise as the standing work. And it's a really nice kind of slightly lazier version, I guess. But it's a nice kind of version. If you're not getting enough of a stretch, you can try this with your foot on the foot bar. I definitely get enough of a stretch here. And we're going to swap to the other side. So let's think about swapping to the other side. I'm going to bring my foot on that front plate, but that at the moment is just going to rest where it is. The knee's going to stay above the ankle, and I'm going to push away with my back leg. So I'm just thinking about opening up through the front of that hip. So try to come nice and upright once you've got your balance. If you're fine with your balance, you can absolutely add in, same as we did at the beginning, you can add in that sort of little bit of a pulling the hand up towards the ceiling as you send the leg back. And then we're going to change that into our sort of modified hamstring stretch. So I'm going to now leave my back leg alone, forget about it, and push away with my front leg. Getting a nice little stretch down the back and back thigh. And if you're not feeling this, you can absolutely bring your foot up onto that foot bar. Okay. Nice. So, I'm going to do a bit of a glute stretch. So with this one, this does require there to be sort of no knee or hip issues. And we're going to come into sort of a bit of a modified pigeon stretch. I'll show you an alternative in a second. So if you do have any sort of knee or hip issues, but if you do have some rotation and it's okay for you to do so, you can come into, I'll show you modifications first. So you can come into kind of a glute stretch in this position. So we're crossing one ankle onto one knee, sitting up nice and tall. You can take a little bit of a lean forward. If you do find that difficult, if there are sort of a hip issue or anything, you can have your front leg out straight, so we sort of create a bit more space in order to do that. So there's a couple of sort of options there for you. Or if you don't like that sort of rotation at the hip, you can kind of just hug the knee in, so the knee stays a little bit more in that sort of, I'm going to say neutral position, it isn't, but let's just say, yeah, and we can hug that in. So there's a couple of different ways to do that there. Otherwise, if there's no sort of issues in the hip or the knee, and you're happy to do so, we're going to come into a bit of a modified pigeon stretch. So, we're going to bring one leg kind of into the front of the carriage there, and sort of hook that ankle out to the side, and then we're just going to slide ourselves sort of back and down. You can just take a moment to slowly glide yourself in. And what we can do here is just add a little bit of a reach. Oh, it's lovely. And let's add a little bit of extension as we come up, so modified down stretch. Okay, so we're kind of rearing up a little bit over that foot bar. So as we reach away, you'll get a deep hip stretch, and then as we come up, think about, it's a bit of like cobra-y stuff really, isn't it? So we're sort of sending the shoulder blades back and down towards the back pockets, tuck the chin slightly, and we kind of peel ourselves up, we rear up over that foot bar, and then send yourself away. So we're getting a little bit of thoracic extension, so that's our back, our mid-back. Oh, that's lovely. And one more. Now, to come out of this, think about taking the weight through your hands. So I'm going to transfer my hands down to my carriage. Push through the hands, so we're not pushing on that bent knee. Bring the back leg into play, and then you can swap yourself over. So we're not pushing away with that sort of compressing down into that knee that's got all the weight through it. All right, let's swap ourselves over. So I'm going to slide one leg back, bring my knee into the centre of the carriage. I'm going to take my ankle over to one side. I've got very different mobility on this side. We can ease ourselves into it a little bit. So I'm just going to take a lean there. So I definitely need a little bit longer on this side. My hip mobility is very, very different left to right. I might see how that feels. That's okay, actually. So I'm just modifying this on this side, so you can carry on and do the other version. I'm just gently lowering myself in because I'm tight in a different area on this side. Oh, I'm just going to hang out there for a second because that feels really nice. Okay, and again, to come back out of this, we want to think about pushing through the back leg and then your hands. Okay, so we sort of lift the body weight a little bit, so we release that leg rather than push away from it. Okay, so we are done for this morning reformer class. So I hope that it's given you something a bit different to think about. So it might have made you think about how to use your springs. So I really like this one, it's nice and simple, just one spring, pretty much one foot bar position unless you use the jump boards, and a little intro to the jump as well. Mainly glutes and hips, a bit of legs, and a bit of abdominal focus today. So my name's Hazel Clark, and if you're ever in the Lake District in the UK, come and find us. We're a mountain massage company.